This episode of Main Street Moxie is proudly sponsored by Oblong Books and Elise Harney Real Estate. What's going on, Mary?
Well, we've got a great guest today. That's what's going on.
So give me the lowdown on Laurie Lisle.
So Laurie Lisle is a published author.
Mm-hmm.
She started her career as a journalist for Newsweek magazine.
Wow.
While she was there, she just decided that she needed to write this biography of Georgia O'Keeffe, which she did.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of helped her segue out of journalism and into being a full-time writer. She wrote a biography of artist Louise Nevelson.
Mm-hmm.
And then she also wrote a memoir about her writing life.
Nice.
Looking back over her journals, and that's called Word for Word, A Writer's Life. And she's also written a book about her journey into gardening since she moved up to Sharon, Connecticut, and that's called 4/10 of an Acre. So Laurie is a deeply introspective and fearless writer looking for facts, truth, insights in others and in herself. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what writerly Moxie looks like through Laurie's eyes.
Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
The great thing about having Oblong as a sponsor of this episode is the fact that all of the books mentioned in this episode, as well as listed in the show notes, can be bought at Oblong.
Oblong bookstores have this amazing, chill literary vibe, and I love soaking it up while I'm scanning the titles.
My favorite thing is going into the children's section for the books, the toys. They are just fantastic. And my other favorite thing is that I follow them on social media, and their posts are so engaging, so visual, and I just love to see all the books that they're promoting and the authors and author signings that they have.
And Oblong Books, they aren't just bricks and mortar in the community. They are all in the community, active in many ways. You can find them at 26 Main Street in Millerton and Montgomery Row in Rhinebeck, and their website is www.oblongbooks.com.
Laurie, thank you so much for coming and joining us today.
Glad to be here.
So we always start off with asking our guests to define Moxie. How would you define it?
I would define Moxie as having a lot of nerve.
Mm-hmm.
When you're faced with a decision or some event in your life and you're really not sure whether you should go in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to very much, but you're afraid of being criticized or making the wrong decision. But your gut tells you that this is the right thing to do, and you do it.
I like that. And have you had a lot of those decisions to make in your life?
Well, I've had a few.
Yeah.
A few big ones. I'd say the first one was, or one of the first ones, was deciding to write a biography of Georgia O'Keeffe way back when, writing the first biography before really the world knew who she was.
Oh.
The art world did, but not the general public. And I was a journalist and felt that with my journalism background, I could do this. And I was entitled to do this. And I never asked her for permission because journalists just don't do that.
Right.
And I jumped in, and at the time I had to take a leave of absence from my job at Newsweek.
Okay.
And then after I spent almost a year away from Newsweek researching the book, including in New Mexico, and not getting O'Keeffe's approval, and not being able to meet with her, and not having even started to write, I had to decide whether to permanently leave my position at Newsweek.
Oh.
And I decided, yes, I would leave it. I was enjoying writing the book so much, researching it, thinking about it. And so I think that took some moxie.
What attracted you to her as a subject?
Well, I saw her big retrospective at the Whitney Museum in 1970 when I was quite young. And I was really blown away by these peaceful images, large peaceful images of in her paintings. This older woman who had apparently had a very successful career as a painter and had an interesting personal life with her marriage to Alfred Stieglitz. And I thought, how does this happen? This was a time when the first wave of feminism in my lifetime was sort of washing over us, early 70s. And a lot of us were looking for different ways of being women. We didn't really want to live the way our mothers had lived in the 1950s. And so I thought, I bet I should find out more about O'Keeffe. Find out how she made decisions, how they turned out, and what propelled her, what made this woman so obviously contented and satisfied and fulfilled in her life. Those are the reasons.
And you wrote another biography of another artist later on, Louise Nevelson.
Yes, I did.
When you write a biography, you talk about it as investigating a life, how you learn to do that. And do you find yourself adopting mindsets or kind of absorbing any energy out of what they've done or how they've conducted themselves that influenced you or impacted you?
Well, yes. I think, obviously, I was attracted to the lives of artists. I think this is because I see artists as inspired individuals who have the courage to pursue, develop, express their personal vision, aesthetic vision. But, of course, to do that, you have to be independent in other aspects of your life, too. You have to be willing to pursue a career with very uncertain financial rewards. You have to be willing to face criticism of your work. And I think that takes a lot of moxie.
Yeah, indeed. Yes, definitely.
And I definitely found O'Keeffe's life inspiring. And I learned a lot from her. At a young age, in my 30s,
Right.
I learned a lot about how to live. And so, yes. And then with Louise Nevelson, I just saw this driving commitment to express herself. She went through a lot of difficulties, a lot of poverty, and being ignored as an artist when she was young, and didn't really achieve any recognition until she was in her 60s. And I thought, oh, wow, this is really, I admire this determination.
Right, right.
How was it researching like Georgia O'Keeffe without talking to her? How I'm just curious, about that process. How you get the insight without talking to her?
Easy, if you're a journalist.
Ah.
It turns out there were letters everywhere. And, a lot of people who had received mail from O'Keeffe had donated it to archives.
Okay.
And she wrote very vividly and honestly, so that there were just letters everywhere. I interviewed many, many people that she had known during her lifetime, including people who had been her students when she taught in Texas. And I interviewed relatives, friends, and there were interviews over the years that had been published in New York magazines and newspapers. So, there was a huge amount of material. And then I just did my own investigation. I went to her hometown of Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, and there are historical museums everywhere. And there was a wonderful one in Canyon, Texas. And you just turn up all kinds of things if you know how to do it, if you have a experience as a reporter.
So that skill carried over absolutely into your ability to research these people.
Yes.
And do you know if she ever read your book?
By the time it came out, she was blind.
Okay.
And she couldn't read. Whether it was read to her or whether it was read partially to her, I have no idea. I never heard from her. I sent her a book,
Right.
sent her a letter. It was this deep silence coming from
Right.
Abiquiu, New Mexico.
Was that hard to accept that you had spent all this time trying to paint a portrait of this person and not have them acknowledge it?
I understood her pretty well.
Okay.
By the time the book came out, and this was just true to her character. She did not cooperate with people who she really didn't have control over. And she had turned away other biographers. I was disappointed, of course. It would have been very nice to have had a friendship with her, but I would have paid a price in loss of control over what I had written.
You have wanted to be a writer since you were very young, or enjoyed writing since you were very young?
I would say I always loved to read, and I began to write seriously in college. Well, maybe in high school. I had some things published when I was in high school, too.
And you talk about keeping a journal and keeping a writer's notebook. Mm-hmm. What is the difference?
Well, when I was in high school, I took a wonderful class in creative writing, and we were given writer's notebooks by our teacher, who said, now you just write down conversations and descriptions, and you won't really know how they'll be used right away, but that's your material.
That's interesting.
And so I did. When I started writing the journal seriously in college, it was that, but it was also my own thoughts and about my own existence and experiences I was having. So, I mean, but that, again, turned out to be material, too.
Have you always wanted to share that? Did you ever think that those journals would end up as memoirs? Did you have, or it was just that's what you were doing at the time to help make sense of the world and your place in it?
I think writers just write. I mean, it's like an artist would keep a sketchbook. I mean, it's how you express yourself. And it seemed very natural to just write about what was going on. And I think that, did I think I would ever use this as material? Well, maybe in the back of my mind. I mean, I kept them very carefully. I never lost any.
Right.
I really wasn't sure when I started that I'd ever be a published writer or I'd ever write a memoir. But there they are, carefully preserved.
Was that your plan, or did you, in high school or college when you started writing, did you know that you wanted to be a journalist or a journalist?
I wanted to be a girl reporter because I wanted to explore the world. I wanted to, I wanted the adventure of being a reporter. I had gone to kind of restrictive girls' schools. And I was just so eager to just leap into the world and discover everything.
What you said earlier about the artists that you chose to do the profiles on, or being an artist, kind of you open yourself up to all these things, including criticism. Can't you say the same about writing though? You're publishing, you're putting it out there, you're opening yourself up for feedback in that way. Did you view it as that, or is that part of the reason you sought out the topics that you did?
Well, I sought out the biographies for different reasons because I wanted to learn about these lives. Mm-hmm. I began to write personally, and that took a different kind of moxie because I knew once I started writing about my own experiences, the first one was not having children, which is kind of a toxic topic to a lot of people. I knew I would be subject to being either ignored or criticized. Mm-hmm. And then it was really very nice to write the gardening book because who can object to a gardener?
That's true.
But there was a lot of personal material in there about my relationships,
right.
Relationships that didn't work, relationships that did work. So again, you are subjecting yourself to criticism or applause, right, depending on who's reading it. And then, of course, writing the memoir was the biggest gamble I took in terms of how are people going to react to how I've lived my life.
To your own memoir you're referring to now?
I'm referring to word for word. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which came out in 21.
Yes.
And you talk about, in an interview that I listened to of you in Library Cafe, developing the self-compassion of going back over the journals from decades and looking at decisions that you made and perhaps regret. And you talk about the act of writing a memoir as being either bravery or recklessness, which sounds like a writerly Moxie.
Well, it's both, really, because you want to tell the truth, or the truth as you understand it. You have to, else what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
And you have no idea how this is going to land, particularly when you write about personal relationships of people who are still living, which I did. And so it definitely takes Moxie. I wanted to do it, though, because I really wanted to look back and understand. I wanted to understand that young girl who I used to be, and decisions she made that influenced my life today. And at times I wanted to scold her, and at times I wanted to hug her. I mean, she was young, and she was inexperienced in a lot of ways, and was finding her way.
Were there things that surprised you in reflecting like that? Were there things that you learned about yourself that you hadn't realized before? Do you care to share any of those?
Well, I learned things about other people, too,
okay.
that I hadn't understood at the time,
Mm-hmm.
which was extremely helpful to understanding them better and forgiving them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think probably the most dramatic thing was in my first marriage, in regard to my first marriage, a few months after I had met my husband, and he was still my boyfriend, he said to me, "When you get more confidence, you're going to leave me." And I wrote that down in the journal, and I totally didn't understand what he was talking about. I thought he was wonderful, and I admired him so much. I had no idea why he would say such a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I forgot all about it. And then when I read the journals years later, in my 70s, I thought, oh. And it made me understand his behavior towards me, his undermining behavior towards me. He was on a quest to stop me from getting any self-confidence.
Because he was afraid.
Because he was afraid I would leave him.
Huh.
And that was a revelation. And I understood the whole dynamic of our relationship. And I kind of forgave him because I realized he was kind of weak, and he didn't have the self-esteem he should have had.
Did you feel lighter after you finished? Like this, not a burden, but just some kind of weight?
I felt clarity, like things that had puzzled me or in the past maybe weighed me down a little bit. Suddenly they were gone because I understood more.
Yeah, I'm trying to picture what that would feel like. Because I had the privilege of taking a memoir class with a Sharon, Connecticut author, Carol Asher.
Oh, a friend of mine.
Oh, okay. So this was going back over a decade ago when she offered it at the Scoville Memorial Library, and she talked about how every life is interesting, because we were all sitting around the table and feeling kind of mundane, and she gave us the confidence to uncover. And some people went at it more of as a global arc of their lives, and other people like me went anecdotal, just different snapshots. And so when you were kind of designing the how the book would flow, did you have an overall plan, or you just started writing and then put it together?
I started to just write because I was exploring. I wasn't sure what I was going to find.
Right.
I hadn't read these journals since I'd written them.
Wow.
And except for maybe small portions when I was writing my books. But so I had no idea what I would find. And I knew that what I found would shape the book.
What has been some of the feedback to the book?
I've gotten some lovely reactions, particularly from writers, women writers.
Okay.
And a couple of hard questions from a couple of dear women friends about, why didn't you leave that first husband sooner? So it's been basically okay. I mean, nobody's said anything terrible, at least not to me. So, and I've gotten surprisingly supportive reactions from my family, from cousins who knew all the characters I wrote about, and my sister and my niece, I mean, it's been really very positive.
That's amazing. I look back on the sporadic journals that I've kept, and I find them very hard to go back and look at. It's almost, I don't know, I feel embarrassed. Like the stuff that I wrote was, I don't know.
It's very hard. I mean, I found it really hard not so much the way I wrote, but what I wrote about, and some very painful experiences.
Right.
But I was determined I was going to read every word. And why? I'm not sure. Except that I'm a reporter.
Yeah.
It's part of being a reporter. You just keep going even when it's difficult. And at times I just had to stop, and I would go take a walk, or I would go out in the garden and pull weeds very vigorously. I mean, I had my ways of sort of working off the distress and that I felt at moments.
You also stated that you wrote that memoir for yourself.
Yes.
Is there a dichotomy between writing for self and writing for others, where the biography's writing for others versus self? How do you determine who you're writing for?
Well, I think that most writers write for themselves. I think how can you develop that energy and sustain that energy for several years of work if there isn't some compelling personal reason why you need to do this? It's hard, and you have no idea what the rewards will be. They have to be deep personal rewards inherent in this. And I think every writer hopes that what they've written will appeal to people, interest people. They hope that if you dig deep enough, you touch universal themes that other people can relate to. You want readers. You want book buyers. But I think the essential drive has to be for something you're searching for, some kind of meaning you're searching for.
Elise Harney Real Estate is the #1 real estate agency for the tri-state region, and they provide a comprehensive overview of the regional market spanning Litchfield, Dutchess, Columbia, and Berkshire counties.
Elise Harney Real Estate serves 40 unique communities with 35 years of experience. They have a team of knowledgeable real estate professionals to work with you to buy or sell your house.
Their offices are located in Salisbury, Millerton, Norfolk, Falls Village, and Riverton, or you can visit them online at www.harneyrealestate.com. How did that manifest in your earlier life? You said you wanted to be a reporter. So how can you tell me, if we're jumping back and forth a little bit? So you went to Newsweek, and how was that experience? How was the writing there? Was it personal as well?
No. I decided to be a journalist in college because I had to earn a living.
Right.
I mean, I needed a job.
Yeah.
That was, and also, I just love the idea of the adventure that would be inherent in that kind of work. And so, at Newsweek, it was not personal at all. You're assigned topics,
right?
And you do suggest them at times, but they don't always happen. You don't always get to report about what you want to report about. So that was not personal.
Were you still inspired to write, even though you may not have been interested?
Well, yes, yeah, and I was learning a lot.
Okay.
I learned a lot about how to report.
Right.
And I learned to write fast and thoroughly and accurately.
Right.
So it was very useful in terms of developing the kind of skills that you need to take into becoming a biographer.
Mm-hmm. And out of all the writing styles, why biography?
Well, I want to learn about O'Keeffe.
I was going to say, was it just because you were so inspired by her? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
It was the topic that led me to biography, the topic of writing about O'Keeffe.
Was that a big change in your writing style to go from a news reporting to, writing autobiographies style, if you will?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. First, writing the biography, I had to write more personally. That was I had to really learn how to do that.
Yeah.
And give my own reactions to O'Keeffe and her decisions and what she was doing. And yes, that was an adjustment. And I think it took writing half the book before I figured out really how to do it. I remember my editor after she read the first 5 chapters, she said, "Laurie, you've finally done it."
Yeah.
So it took a lot of work.
Did you feel that you had finally done it, or was that an epiphany to you when they said that?
I think I was really pleased.
Yeah.
And I felt it was flowing by then.
And when it's not flowing, I feel like, I can't remember if it was Virginia Woolf who, with young children, would get up early in the morning and write and somehow fit it in her day. I might be misremembering, but that habit, that regularity of whether you feel it or not, just getting words out.
Absolutely. This is incredibly important to anybody as a writer. You have to regard it as a job. You're working at home, probably, and you just have to sit down at your desk at a certain time and stay there for 4 hours at least every day. It has to be more than desire. It has to be discipline. And then it becomes desire, because that's what you do. And if you don't do it, you feel something's wrong. It's a discipline you have to develop.
Do you experience writer's block ever, or do you just not even permit that? You just write about anything that, it doesn't have to be the thing you thought you were going to write about. You just write.
Well, as a nonfiction writer, you have an advantage because there's always work to do. You always have your material or interviews, and you can always, even if you can't figure out how to start a chapter or how to finish a chapter, you can fuss with your research and
fact check. And I find that that's helpful. Those kind of administrative side tasks can sometimes jar me into being able to get something out. So I could see how that would help.
So how do you go from autobiographies to then the gardening book?
Well,
I'm just thinking topic-wise, it's so,
well, it was
different.
It was my garden.
Yeah.
So, and when I moved to Sharon from New York, I was like totally overtaken by this desire to have a garden. And I didn't know where this had come from. And it was a little disturbing at first because it was taking a lot of time.
Yeah.
It was taking time away from writing. And I was enjoying gardening more than writing, which seemed very threatening to my career. And so it really wasn't such a leap from writing personally.
Okay. So the garden inspired different writing. It
inspired more descriptive writing. And I was writing about relationship to nature, and there's a chapter in there about a writer's relationship to gardening. It's a long tradition of, particularly in England, English writers of gardening and writing. They're the perfect counterbalances to each other. What you in the morning you're sitting there, not moving anything but your fingers, and you're thinking hard, and then you go out in the afternoon and you don't think very hard at all, but you're totally in motion. It's just, I found it a perfect balance. And I would say the writing kept the gardening going, and the gardening kept the writing going.
That's nice.
Yeah.
What was your biggest takeaway from after you finished that book?
Well, I was working so hard on the book, I didn't have time to garden. So I wanted to go back in the garden and pull the weeds and do the pruning and fertilizing and planting that I hadn't had time to do while I was working on deadline.
I feel like that kind of counterbalance could apply to a lot of combinations of life, because it's mindful, it's kinetic and movement. It allows you to access a deeper level of concentration in a different way, which then allows creativity in, because you're immersed and you're in a flow state.
Yes, it's a holistic experience to balance the mind and the body in various ways.
And you talk about in Word for Word that you're attracted to quiet things. Like, I think it was gardening, writing, hiking, knitting.
Reading.
So those things sustain you because writing is it depleting in a way? Does it draw from you?
Yes. Yeah, you need to fill the well.
Right.
When you've poured out your words for a while, you need to replenish yourself. And, I must say I'm an introvert. So
right.
The way I and other introverts, we replenish ourselves is by going and doing quiet things, and of various kinds, and also talks with friends.
Yes, of course, and yoga.
Yes.
Do you think of writing as a cruel mistress? Is it something you're drawn to do it, and at times it's painful, and that you're in service to it, or do you find it a joyful?
It's both at different times. I mean, sometimes it's very, very difficult. You feel isolated. You feel like your mind is sort of been totally captured by your topic. It was very isolating during the pandemic. But happily, my husband is an artist. Also, we were together, so that sort of made it easier. But yes, it can be very difficult. And also the publishing world has changed a lot, and it's made it much tougher on writers,
right,
in various ways. It's very demanding. You have to really want to do it. You have to really want that form of self-expression to stick with it, I think, particularly today.
Well, that's its own form of moxie, right? Just the whole process of writing, of getting it out there, it's its own persistence.
Yeah, it's a determination. And it's a certain kind of bravery, I think.
Yeah.
To take it on. Yeah.
How have you dealt with setbacks? We've used the word failure before, but we kind of changed it to setbacks. How, in your field and in your life, how have you viewed those and pivoted when faced with them?
As a writer?
As a writer, just in life, or in regards to the Moxie angle?
Well, I've had plenty of failures in relationships and in their books that I wish had sold more than they did. I don't know. You just keep going. You have to value yourself enough to realize that, well, maybe this is a little disappointing, or maybe it's very disappointing, but there's still things you can do, and there's a future, and you are who you are with your talents and your aspects of your personality that perhaps aren't as strong, but you're entitled. You're entitled to find what you want, try to find what you want, and live the way you want.
That's an interesting perspective. It's a positive sense of entitlement, not this kind of privilege entitlement, but that you have a right to determine yourself and to seek out and to overcome. That's an empowering viewpoint, I think, to state it that way.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You've heard that before.
I don't, yeah, maybe I have. But it's an interesting way to assert yourself in the world, that I have a right to determine myself artistically or however, and I'm going to claim it.
Right, and find happiness where you can.
Another thing that I thought was interesting that you spoke about was a hiking trip to New Mexico where you wrote a letter to your younger self. And I thought, what an interesting exercise that I could use in a classroom. And what prompted that on that hillside?
Well, I was with a group of other women, and we all had our notebooks with us. We were writers. And somebody made the suggestion, and it seemed like a really interesting thing to do. Here we were in this very high peak in southern Colorado. Wind was blowing furiously. We felt very distant from normal life. And it was it invited looking back and talking to these girls we were, and how they had shaped our lives.
And was that letter written in advance of your desire to write your memoir? Did that in any way trigger that?
It's an interesting question, because it happened a couple of years before I decided to write the memoir. And I think it might have subconsciously.
Do you think your younger self would have been happy to receive that letter?
I don't know.
Well, we're in the age of multiverses, so I was trying to imagine what that would look like for me. I tend to be very unforgiving of myself.
Well, I did write a paper when I was 18 years old, and a professor had asked us to write about what we wanted from life or something like that. And I said I wanted to be able to look back with compassion.
At 18, you said that?
I said that at 18.
Wow.
And so, I think that 18-year-old would have been okay with reading word for word.
That's amazing that you had that kind of awareness to know that that was something that would be necessary for you.
Well, I don't know where it came from.
Well, I mean, you're a deeply curious, you seem, I don't know you other than this, but you seem like a deeply curious and introspective, not in a like getting in your head kind of way, but in a really analytical, like trying to understand what motivates you, what motivates others. And so I mean, it doesn't sound atypical from what you've been saying that you would have that kind of awareness.
Well, I've always had a lot of curiosity about everything, what's going on around me, what's going on inside me. And I think there's another quality that's important is the willingness to dig deep and then let it out. And I don't know where that comes from either. Maybe it's just you're born with it. But I think I always like to get deep down into what's happening with my friends, what's happening with my relatives. And it's a kind of intimacy. It's a desire for deep intimacy with people. And that's just part of who I am.
But it's also a bravery of opening a potential Pandora's box and just kind of be like, okay, I'm opening it. Whatever comes out, I'll just deal with it.
Yeah, this is true. A lot of people don't like to do that.
No.
I've noticed that there, I have certain friends who there's a wall there. You can only go so far. But I find it pretty fascinating.
Right.
Because you understand human beings better and who we are as people.
Isn't it also kind of necessary in autobiographical writing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
To be willing and open to investigate at that level?
Oh, yes.
Both for yourself and for the subject at hand?
Absolutely. You couldn't write a memoir if you weren't willing to do that.
Mm.
So we're coming close to the end, believe it or not. What words of wisdom or suggestions would you have for our listeners, whether they're writers or not? It could be writerly advice, it could be just general advice of how to move their own Moxie needle a little bit to embrace new challenges or
maybe even change perspective on things as you have in your life.
Well, I think it's important to listen to yourself and to really know what matters to you and forget about what matters to other people for a while. And when you dig deep and you understand, what has meaning for you, what excites you, and then act on that. Have the nerve to act on that and see where it takes you. And it may cause waves, but you have to let the waves wash over you and just keep following your knowledge, your instinct of what's important, and to trust it, to realize that it's not destructive. It's okay.
But that, now we're going to get into something else. But that also, I feel like, has to do with the intention. Your intention is not to hurt or to expose people as being less than or anything like that. Your intention is discovery and curiosity. Do you think that has helped you, that the intention with which you write?
Yes. No, I definitely don't want to hurt people or disturb them in any way. But sometimes if you express what you really think, it's going to ruffle some
Right.
feathers.
Yeah.
But not everyone's feathers.
No, no.
There'll be some people who'll be really grateful that you've done what you've done.
And do you have any projects on the horizon, gardening or otherwise, literary?
Oh, sure.
Anything you
Sure.
want to share?
Well, I would like to pull together essays I've written and write some more and publish them. But right now I'm really busy in the garden.
What's the project?
Well, I just have to tend all my little plants out there and feed them and weed and water and the usual.
Well, if 4/10 of an acre proves to be too small, you're welcome to come over to my house and work magic, because I am not a gardener. Anyway, Laurie, thank you so much for joining us on Main Street Moxie today. It's been a pleasure, and we're really glad you decided to join us.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much. So, Mary, that was a little different. I love that about all of our guests, though, that everyone is so different.
That was really interesting to hear about how a writer approaches Moxie.
I totally agree. I loved her definition, and it goes so in tune with basically her whole life's journey and how she has approached her work.
Well, yeah, and she applies the same investigative skills from her early career at Newsweek to her biographies, and then to herself through her memoir.
Mm-hmm. I loved how when I asked her how she went about writing an autobiography on Georgia O'Keeffe without talking to her, and she's like, I'm a reporter,
right?
And it was like, duh. So I thought that was really fun to hear that explanation, how that all came about. But one of the main things that I took for her little nuggets, wisdom throughout was just, to me, I interpret it as, she has stayed true to herself, despite if it's an up or a down or, somewhere in the middle, just to, know who you are and what you're doing and what you want to do and stay true to that.
Yeah. And I think that idea of entitlement to assert yourself in the world and to claim a piece of it for yourself was,
that you have a right
was interesting. Yeah. And that she does it in a quiet, determined way. I also was interested in those quiet activities that replenish her. And I think in our world of just constant screen, constant motion, that she carves out that time to do those things that she knows are going to make her a better writer, a more compassionate person, and more authentic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the world can be so chaotic. So to me, hearing, I feel calmer talking to her just because
I did too.
Yeah, because she has such a calming presence, and just hearing her story or stories, that calmness radiating through everything and filling the well, as she called it.
Right.
It kind of makes you go, well, in all the chaos that's around us, that's so important.
Yeah, I need to do more of that.
So
not gardening though. Something else.
Me too. I have black thumbs. I'm not allowed to touch anything.
No. The other last thing that I was struck with was, aside from the creative part of writing, that it is a discipline.
Yes.
And that it requires regular attempts, just getting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard. And I thought that she's very dedicated to her craft in that way.
I think you have to be, though, if you want to be at the level she's at, and the dedication and the mind and the emotion that goes into it.
Exactly. So that's Laurie Lisle.
I hope you enjoy.
Yeah.
Check out the show notes for all the details and links to her books and blog and anything and everything else.
And I'll see you next time, Thorin.
See ya. This episode of Main Street Moxie is proudly sponsored by Oblong Books and Elise Harney Real Estate.